All right. You ready?
Yep.
I'm Sam.
And this is Gabe.
And this is Coaster Wars.
All right, today we got our David versus Goliath battle. I think this is going to be a really, really good one. Two coasters that are similar but different at the same time, I think.
I was researching both these coasters, and I'm like, they're somehow similar, but yet on the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. It's going to be really interesting comparing these two coasters, I think, today, so...
Absolutely. This is definitely going to be a fun one. I think without further ado, should we introduce the fighters?
I agree.
All right. In the red corner, standing at a height of 74 feet and reaching a top launch speed of 54 miles per hour. Hailing from the farm fields of Ohio and the premier gym, it is the Flight of Fear. In the blue corner, standing at a height of 456 feet, reaching a top launch speed of 128 miles per hour, hailing from the trees of New Jersey and the Intamin Gym, it is Kingda. Let the fight begin. All right, so my number 14 coaster would be Kingda here.
And my number 14 coaster is Flight of Fear from Kings Island in Ohio.
So yeah, one thing to note about both these roller coasters, they're both launch coasters, which means they use a launching system to get up to their top speed. Obviously, one is incredibly faster than the other. But I think the biggest difference between these two roller coasters is one is all about the launch. Like, the entire ride experience is built around the launch, and that would be Kingda. And then Flight of Fear is built more as the launch is just to get it up to speed. And then after that, you have a total ride experience after the launch. It's not the primary reason why you get on the ride. Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree. It really is it's the replacement for a launch hill, and honestly, it was probably meant to just be a space saver, because after the launch, you're launched into this spaghetti ball of track that just throws you in every direction, and then you have the added effect of it being an indoor coaster that's completely dark, so you cannot see where you're going.
Yeah, that's another notable thing about these two coasters, is Kingda is fully outside, where Flight of Fear, the entire ride, the launch track, the station, even the queue line, everything is indoors. So that's another notable difference between these two roller coasters.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing that...
I can 100% agree with that, because it's one of those things where just the sheer size of Kingda, it's the first thing you see in the parking lot. You can see it even before you get to the actual physical park, just because of the sheer height of it. And when you get to Flight of Fear, all you see is the building. You don't get to see any of the track, and so it's kind of a mystery what you're going to get from this ride.
Yeah, the other notable difference between these two roller coasters is that Flight of Fear features an LIM launch system, which is a magnetic launch system. It's a little bit different than the LSMs that you have today. LIMs aren't as strong, and they usually require a little bit more energy to run the launch system, where Kingda is actually a hydraulic launch system, and it is an incredibly powerful and punchy and aggressive launch system versus the LIM. You still get that punch at the beginning, I think, but once you get up to speed, you don't really feel it as much as the hydraulic launches.
100%.
And that's another huge difference between these two roller coasters.
Well, and to talk about the LIM launch just a little bit, like you said, it's not as punchy as the LSMs, and it requires more energy, but it's actually considered sort of the predecessor to the LSMs. And then on top of that, Flight to Fear is actually credited as the first coaster to sport an LIM launch. So that's a little bit of a history kind of piece there.
Absolutely. Premier Rides, that's their specialty. They specialize in launch coasters, and in the LIM technology, you're correct. It came before the LSMs, and they were at the forefront of launch coasters, and that's why you see a lot of premier launch coasters around the US, is because they were a US based company, and they were the first people to really focus on magnetic launch systems, where Intamin had the hydraulic launch, and that was what they were known for, is the hydraulic launch. The only thing with the hydraulic launches is they're incredibly unreliable,
Yes.
very unreliable launch system.
Can speak to the unreliability, because it's both Kingda and then its little brother Top Thrill Dragster. It could be a toss up whether it's going to be running that day, and even when we went to the park to ride the coaster, it was the added effect of it being unreliable, but it also can't run when there's a chance of lightning in the area. So it was like it closed down and then it opened, and we're like, oh, okay, but we were on the other side of the park. So we're like, all right, we're going to ride whatever ride we're riding, and then we'll run over there. Well, by the time we got over there, it closed down already. And so we, like, went through it a couple times during the day, and we finally just went, all right, instant it opens, it doesn't matter what line we're in, what ride we're trying to ride, we're literally booking it over there, because we literally went to that park, basically, to ride that one in El Toro, and we're like, we're getting a ride on this dang ride.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and the thing with King Nakat is that it's unreliable, and then some people go to the parks and they can't even ride it. Like, they'll be there all day and it never opens. So it's one of those kind of rides that's hard to get on. If you go to the park, you're not guaranteed to ride it. So it could be incredibly frustrating sometimes, especially what happened to us. The cool thing about both of these coasters is that me and you both experienced these at the same time.
Yeah.
So we have very similar experiences on both roller coasters.
Yes. So, speaking of our Flight to Fear experience first, it was one of those, we took a really big roller coaster trip, and this was our second park of the trip, and Gabe was, he does a lot of the research and stuff, and so he's telling me all about these coasters and whatnot, and we get over to this section of the park, and he's like, oh, it's an indoor coaster, I haven't done much research onto it, and honestly, you don't really expect too much from indoor coasters. And it was like we walked into this having no idea what it was. We walked into this amazingly built queue line, and then we get in and we start seeing the signs that talk about having your head back against the headrest. And we get into the station and we're just like, we both look at each other as that first train launches right out of the station, and we go, oh my gosh, it's a launch coaster. And it was this great actual surprise. We were very both surprised, or at least I was, when I rolled this ride.
Well, from our perspective, our last indoor coaster that we had experienced would have been the Dark Knight coaster at Six Flags Great America, which is just a wild mouse inside a giant building. So that's what I was expecting, was just a kind of a family coaster or a kiddie coaster, not something extreme. And this coaster, you can definitely put into the extreme category, especially with was it 3 inversions, I think?
It has
4. It's either 3 or 4.
It's 4.
It is 4?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it is all indoors and hidden away and stuff, you can't, like other roller coasters, especially at Kings Island, like Orion and Diamondback and Mystic Timbers and stuff like that, you can see the layout before you actually even ever get on the roller coaster. So you can kind of plan what to expect. In your head, you kind of start going through the layout, and oh, okay, it's going to do this or that. It might have an inversion here or an inversion here, but with Flight of Fear, you don't get that. It's just a big white building.
Yes.
With Flight of Fear on the front of it. So when you first come up to the coaster, you're completely walking in blind on what to expect, especially if you don't know a whole lot about coasters. You don't do research like I do.
Yeah.
And even for me, I did research on this coaster, and I never realized it was a launch coaster. So, even for a coaster enthusiast, if you don't know a ton about the park you're going to, you can still be pleasantly surprised by it.
Yes.
It's definitely one of the better rides in the park, in my opinion. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree. So, from that vein, why don't we just go into the layout of this coaster really quick? So, like we said, you're launched straight from the station, you're all loaded in, and it's a 54-mile-per-hour launch in 4 seconds. And then you go into a Cobra roll, that leads you into a sidewinder, and then there is a block break section that goes into a bunch of turns that kind of just bring you all over the place and pull some really good G's. That leads into a final corkscrew and the final brake run that brings you back into the station. So, I will say that from my perspective, pacing is a little bit off because you have a bunch of those inversions right at the beginning of the ride, and then it leads you into this section that kind of just pulls you around in every direction, and it's still pretty intense, but I just feel like the inversions aren't very well spread out on this ride, but it's still a lot of fun to ride.
Yeah, the one thing I really enjoy about this roller coaster is that it launches you into that Cobra Roll and the Sidewinder like you were talking about, and then it stays really elevated until you hit that block zone that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then after you hit the block zone, is you twist down through the rest of the spaghetti bowl, you actually start to gain your speed. And, you know, a lot of roller coasters, you got airtime hills and stuff, so you gain speed, then you lose speed, then you gain speed, then you lose speed. With this roller coaster, you get that launch initially, so you get a ton of speed, and then you lose it all. And then you hit that block zone, that brake section, and then you slowly gain it back. And then by the end, you're almost traveling at 50 miles an hour as you're exiting the spaghetti bowl. And for me, that's a really cool thing because it builds and builds and builds. And then you hit that last final inversion, and it's a really good, awesome finale for this roller coaster where some rides kind of peter out towards the end and they don't have that ton of energy. This one, it's a grand finale, and then you hit the final brakes, and then it's over, which is awesome in my opinion.
Yeah, that's actually a good point because that's one thing I do have written down is that final brake run can be a bit intense once you're just like you said, you're just kind of slammed into that, and it's got to stop you one way or another. So.
Yeah. So the one thing that I'd like to mention is that I have ridden one of the clones down in Texas. So down at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas, they have a ride called Poltergeist, and it's a clone of Flight of Fear, except for it's completely outdoors. So if you do want to get an idea of what this coaster looks like, you can look at pictures of that ride. But the one thing I like to mention is that I prefer Flight of Fear over that ride, just because the near misses are more effective inside a building where it's pitch black out and you can't see. And the other cool thing is, on Poltergeist, you can see the inversions, you know they're coming. Where Flight of Fear, when we rode it, we had no idea it even went upside down.
Oh, yeah.
So you hit that first inversion, and you're completely blown away by what your expectations were.
When I first rode this ride, I did not know that it went upside down, and you should have heard me when I rode this. We went through that first inversion, and all I could scream was, "Oh my gosh, Gabe! It went upside down!" I was like, completely baffled that this indoor coaster just turned me upside down.
Yeah, and that launch, I know I said it's not very peppy or a very strong launch, but it has still got a little bit of initial kick to it. You know, it seems like it'll get you up to about 30 miles an hour real quick, and then the tail end of the launch is where you kind of lose that strength. But it still does have a little bit of a kick leaving the station, I think.
Oh, yeah, I 100% agree with that. It was actually a pretty good launch for what the coaster is.
Oh, absolutely. And you got to remember, so this one is 1996?
Yes, sir.
Oh, wow, right on the money. So it's not a brand new ride anymore. It is a little bit rough, in my opinion, but it kind of gives it a little bit of character. Would you agree with that? That it adds a little bit of character to the ride?
It gives you this sense, because like the whole theme of this ride is that it's a UFO kind of deal, so it really kind of gives you that feeling of like you're just being thrown around in this UFO that's just flying all over the place in every direction. And it's right, sometimes if this ride is too smooth, it doesn't feel as intense. This ride has a certain level of intensity that, again, you're not expecting from an indoor coaster, and it catches you by surprise.
Yeah. One thing that probably gets it up into your top 15, and I want to bring this up just because you love this so much, is the theming in the queue line.
Oh my god.
That's got to be one of the reasons it's in your top 15.
Absolutely. The only thing Gabe was able to tell me about this ride is that apparently you went up into a spaceship. And I'm like, well, what the heck does that mean? And when you initially, so the outside of the building is like designed like an old warehouse. And it's really kind of an Area 51 knockoff. But when you get in, you're led into this press area and it's talking about this UFO discovered. And you're playing the part of some press officers that have come in. They're been brought in by these scientists that still believe it's a hoax. They're like, we're going to let you guys come in and check it out. And you go through this whole queue line that leads through the warehouse then. But then, yes, the station actually leads it up into a whole facade that looks like a UFO. And doing some research, what they were able to do is actually use mirrors so it looks like a full UFO, when in reality they only had to build about half of it, which then leads you into the station. And then you're inside this spaceship and there's aliens and these like glass tubes and there's suits all over the place, and it's just, gosh, I love a little bit of theming.
Well, to go into a little bit of the history too, so back when Kings Island debuted this roller coaster, they were still a premier park.
Paramount Park.
Or Paramount Park, sorry.
Okay.
And so this was actually originally themed, is it a TV show called Outer Limits, or was it a movie?
It was a TV show that was released in the 1960s, and it was kind of,
Yes.
what is it? The Twilight Zone. It was kind of a Twilight Zone analog, but it was geared more towards specifically sci-fi. And so it told single stories in every episode that were somehow sci-fi linked.
And so that's what the original basis behind the roller coaster and the theming was the Outer Limits. And after they lost Paramount, after they sold the park, basically, they lost the rights to that, to the Outer Limits. You know, they lost the copyright stuff, so they had to de-theme it a little bit. But that's why it has such great theming, and it just screams 90s, though. When you walk into the, when you walk into the hangar and you see the, everything that they have decorated, it just screams 90s.
It really does. And then on top of that, they have this little video presentation that's like playing when you're in the warehouse section of the queue line next to the UFO before you've gone up in it. It's this little video that's talking about like the discovery of the UFO and stuff. And it's like, even that little video, oh my gosh, you can tell it was made in the 90s. And it really is kind of just like a nostalgia jump for you, which is really a lot of fun too.
Yeah, so overall, it's a really good ride experience. The one thing I will say this coaster has over Kingda is the fact that it is a complete ride experience. You have the theming, you have the queue line, and then you get into the station and you have the launch and you have inversions as well. It's a very complete ride experience from start to finish.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So, heading over to Kingda though, it's like you have that missing full ride experience, but you also have 120 mile per hour launch that sends you up the tallest roller coaster in the world. So that kind of speaks for itself on its own level, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing about Kingda is it has that allure of being the world's tallest roller coaster. And that's the one thing I kept saying as we were walking to ride it. I'm like, it's the world's tallest. Like, this is it. This is as tall as it gets. At least for now. And for me, personally, that holds something special to say that I've been on the world's tallest roller coaster. And then when you actually hear the height number, 456 feet, it's just like, you can't comprehend it until you're standing next to it.
That is a ridiculous number. And what is the drop tower that goes up into the top hat of it? I forget what it's called.
Zumanjaro?
Zumanjaro. Like, if...
Zumanjaro.
Sometimes when you ride Kingda, you're like up there for so little time, like, and you've already experienced this launch and you've just been shot up, so you don't have time to comprehend. If you really want to comprehend how tall this ride is, ride Zumanjaro, because it's a drop tower, so you have a couple seconds at the top to kind of just look out and appreciate the park. And Kingda still goes higher than you go on that stinking drop tower. So it gives you a second to appreciate how tall this thing really is.
Absolutely. That's one of the best drop towers I've ever experienced. I believe it is the tallest. It is over 400 feet, but I can't give you an exact height. But yeah, just going up the tower and you can see over the rest of the park and you can see the parking lot and stuff. And you see you everything gets so tiny when you go that high up in the air. Would you agree with that?
Oh my
And
gosh, yes.
and so to experience the full height of it, ride the drop tower for sure. But this roller coaster is all about the launch, and that's what this roller coaster is built around. Is the 128 mile an hour from 0 to 128. That's what this coaster is about. Is that launch?
And it does that in 3.5 seconds. It does it in 0.5 seconds shorter than what Flight of Fear gets you to only 54 miles per hour. Like, that's just a tiny bit insane. We can all agree on that. It's just a tiny bit insane.
Oh, absolutely. And so to dive into Kingda Ka's layout, there isn't a lot to it. So the cool thing is they have dual stations, which you probably won't even see them run unless it's a super busy day. The thing about Kingda Ka is that if you go there on a slow day, not everybody's going to try and ride it because it's just too extreme for them, or it's broken down for half the day. So then when it finally opens, people don't necessarily know it opened right away. So if you could sneak over there, there's not necessarily going to be a line. But anyway, so you roll out of the station, and the cool thing about this roller coaster is it completely stops you. So you roll forward, you go through a little bend where the two tracks come together for the dual stations, and then it stops you on the launch track. So you're fully stopped 0 miles per hour, and then it launches you. And that launch is just crazy intense, and then you shoot up the 400-foot tall top hat, and as you're going up, it's a 90-degree twist, and you go up and over the top hat, and then it's like 270 degrees the opposite way, and then you bottom out at the bottom of the top hat, and then you hit a 120-foot tall airtime hill, and then at the bottom of the airtime hill is where you hit the final brakes. So there's not a lot to this layout. It is a very short layout, but that launch is something else. I'm going to keep saying that this whole entire podcast is that launch. And the trick is to ride it in the front row. That's where you have to ride this roller coaster.
Very much so. We don't say that about a lot of coasters, but this is definitely a front row ride. Even if you have to wait for it, ride it in the front row. It is a completely different experience. Me and Gabe are very avid back row people. Most rides are better in the back row, especially if you're into the airtime. That's where you're going to get best airtime most of the time. When you ride this ride, like Gabe said, it makes the launch, like, I swear to goodness, 10 times more intense because you just got that wind shear in your face. And then we realized that going over the top hat, you almost get a little bit of ejector airtime going over the top hat because you're just thrown into it. It doesn't slow down until, like, maybe half the train has crested the top hat.
Yeah, you definitely get some more airtime in the front row. The one thing I noticed personally is that the launch just feels more extreme, more intense in the front because, like you said, because of the wind. But the thing that is notable about this coaster is it's not a smooth launch at all. It is, it shakes you around a little bit, and that just makes it feel a little bit more. Here's the biggest question that a lot of people ask, though: is Top Thrill Dragster better, or is Kingda Ka better?
See, and I struggle with this question, but I think that Top Thrill's launch was just a tiny bit better. It just a smidge, just a smidge there.
I completely disagree. I love Kingda Ka's launch. The thing about Kingda Ka's launch is it feels like driving a car. It feels a little more realistic because it kind of feels like you're grabbing gears. Like you get a hit and then it kind of levels out, but then you get another little hit and then it levels out. And for me, it makes it feel a little bit more realistic. But I love the roughness of Kingda Ka's launch. It just makes it feel more extreme. Now, if you don't like rough roller coasters, you probably won't like it more than Top Thrill. But I love that little bit of rattle in it. So I would actually pick Kingda Ka over Top Thrill. And then just the fact that it's the world's tallest and Top Thrill technically isn't makes it a little bit better in my opinion.
Yes. From my perspective, if you go down this really steep, fast drop on a roller coaster and you hit it in the back row and you're just pulled over and you get that butterfly feeling as you go down, I get those during launches, and the more punchy a launch is, the more I get that in my stomach. And like Gabe said, because Kingda Ka is a more gradual progression of its speed, Top Thrill is just, it feels a little bit more like you're instantly there, and so I get more of that butterfly feeling in my stomach, which is what I really like. And to talk about the roughness on this ride a little bit, me and Gabe were pondering that when we rolled the coaster. We were wondering if it's just like, is it because of the age of the coaster? Is it because it's at a Six Flags park and they're not exactly the greatest at maintaining their coasters? And what I found in my research is it's missing some lateral supports that Top Thrill has when it was built. And so that's why it's more quote unquote rough. It doesn't have that extra support there, so the track actually sways a little bit when it's launched.
Yeah, rough isn't the right word. I wouldn't call this roller coaster rough. It's shaky is what it is. It's more of a left and right movement than like hitting speed bumps on the track. Because when I think about rough, I immediately think about El Toro and just the jackhammering and stuff. It's another coaster at that park. But this coaster isn't rough. It's shaky. It shakes you back and forth. And this is the one thing between Top Thrill and Kingda Ka too. Kingda Ka features the over-the-shoulder restraints.
Yes.
Where Top Thrill is just a lap bar. So, and the reason why people probably don't like Kingda Ka's launch as much, especially for shorter people, is because of the over-the-shoulder restraints. Because it shakes you left to right, you actually kind of ping-pong back and forth with your head between the restraints, especially for shorter people.
Yes.
And that's another reason why I think a lot of people will pick Top Thrill over this roller coaster, because the restraints on Top Thrill are better.
Yes. I would like to point out that we did ride it in the back and the front, and we said front row. Well, when you're in the front, you don't get quite as much as that shakiness. You definitely feel it a lot more in the back. So if you wanted to negate that shakiness just a little bit, it would be better ride in the front row again. Where if you, like Gabe, you love that, ride it in the back row, you get thrown all around like a tail.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the one thing about Kingda Ka and Top Thrill, you could say probably for both rides. They're front row rides. You want to get a front row. You actually want to sit there and wait the extra 20 minutes to get a front row experience. Because there is nothing else really like it besides maybe Formula Rossa over in Europe. But in the U.S., this is, in the U.S., Kingda Ka is the fastest roller coaster at 128 miles an hour. So there really is nothing else like that here in the country to ride, and you have to wait for the front row.
Yes.
But I suppose we have hit our 27-minute mark, so I think it's time that we start talking about which coaster is going to win. Would you like to go first?
This one, as much as Kingda Ka really is a really intense ride, and it's one of those things where you have to ride if you're a roller coaster enthusiast, Flight of Fear easily wins this one for me. So Kingda Ka didn't even make my top 15 list, and I've ridden the ride, and I think my perspective on it is that you miss the rest of the ride. I just wish it were longer, but so Flight of Fear really, it's my winner for this one. And then I hate to say it, but I'm all about theming, and I'm like, I know it's not the actual ride itself, but I love a good bit of theming, and Flight of Fear has it all for me, so it really does.
Well, Kingda Ka virtually has zero theming. I mean,
yeah.
I couldn't even tell you what the name meant, like Kingda Ka, or what they're trying to base it off of. So there's like zero theming for that roller coaster. But for me, I love launches. I absolutely love launches, and this is the second best launch in the country. And for me alone, I got to take my Kingda Ka on this one. If you guys are wondering, my number one launch is actually Max Force at Six Flags Great America. There's just something about that launch that's even better than Kingda Ka. But I love Kingda Ka. The other thing about Kingda Ka is that Top Thrill Dragster is losing its launch. They're putting LSMs in, and its initial launch is only going to be 70 miles an hour, which I know is still a great number. But Kingda Ka is really going to stand alone now in the next couple of years as the only way to get that ride experience. And I love it. I love it from start to finish. The top hat, the spiral down, the laterals, you get 300 feet in the air. For me, Kingda Ka is one of the best coasters in the country. And I got to take it over Flight of Fear on this one.
All right. That's all right. We are able to agree to disagree. So.
Yeah. Well, you value theming a lot more than I do. That's one thing I'd like to mention, is that for you, theming is a lot more important.
Well,
And for me, I just want to get launched. Just launch me, throw me around, toss me around. That's why I like Maverick so much. Toss me around, give me a headache, I don't care. It's fun for me.
well, and as I'm realizing, like, doing research on some of these coasters and stuff is, like, after we've started this podcast, I'm really gonna have to sit down and evaluate my top 15. The problem is that we were putting together this podcast, and Gabe's like, you have to sit down and actually put your list together, and I'm like, I don't even know how to rank some of these rides, and I've ridden ones that he hasn't ridden, and then, like, it's hard to explain, but, like, I'm gonna have to sit down and reevaluate my 15, and then on top of that, I've gone to another park now, and I've ridden my number one coaster there that is not going to be currently included on this list. So, I'm just gonna have to...
And that's the thing about us, is that we're on opposite sides of the country. So some of the roller coasters that you've ridden, I haven't. And then some of the roller coasters I've ridden, you haven't. And the thing with us is that we're also doing trips together. Like this summer we went out to Six Flags Great Adventure together. I flew out there, and then we went to the park together for the first time. So we're always doing trips, and our top 15s are always changing. The only thing that has really steadfast in mine is probably my number one coaster, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. I think that'll be a good battle after we finish our top 15s, is to take your new number one and compare it to my number one, because those are two very similar coasters.
Yeah, very much so. Actually, that would be a good one to duel it out. So.
That would be a really good one.
Yeah. So.
But wrapping this episode up, our next episode is going to be classic versus special effects. Two very different roller coasters. Very different.
And in case you haven't noticed,
I don't think you could...
In case you haven't noticed, a theme with mine, this is my number 13 is another one that's very...
Another themed coaster.
Another indoor
yes,
coaster,
for sure. Yes. A coaster I haven't experienced. That's the other interesting thing about our next battle, is my coaster you have not ridden, and then your coaster I have not ridden. So that'll be a little bit interesting to see if we can convince each other that the one roller coaster is better that you've never experienced.
Yes.
So
all right. Well,
wrapping this podcast up.
Yep. We'll see everybody next week.
All right.
For our episode of the classic versus the special effects coaster.